Hi, welcome to Open Door Salon. I'm Lori Ellis. This episode is airing after the JPM Healthcare Conference, which is the Sundance Film Festival of the life sciences industry. And there's always a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around this event. But there are also concerns expressed at this conference about what the coming year will look like, and for that matter, what the next 5 years are going to look like. So today I have two industry leaders with me who are going to discuss some of what they're seeing in the future. And maybe they'll offer some advice on how to navigate the challenges and opportunities ahead. Ladies, please introduce yourselves to the audience.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Chris Bardon. I am the co-managing partner here at MPM Capital. So we were a dedicated biotech investment firm that works across both private and public investing. My own background is that I'm a physician by training. I trained at the Harvard Medical School and then later at the Brigham. And then after doing my MBA, I've been doing this now for actually over 20 years. Before I started my own fund, I was at Fidelity. And now, after merging my fund onto the MPM platform, I've been here now for about the last almost 10 years.
And Elaine.
That's a hard act to follow. But I'm Elaine. I'm a scientist by training. And I guess much of my career can be described in and out of startups in some shape or form. I've been at the bench of one. I've been on the technology transfer side and leading the efforts at a university, and then served briefly on the venture capital side and ended up joining one of the companies that I funded, and have been on the operations side of drug development for the past decade or so. And that's really been an exciting piece of my career journey. And I've been in drug development ever since. I am currently the manager of a portfolio of pharmaceutical companies. And in addition to that, I'm also the executive in residence at Tulane School of Medicine. And the other odd hat I wear is I am the executive director for the Alliance of Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. So, a lot of hats.
Let's talk a little bit about the current landscape. Chris, in the past, you've given me some insight into the COVID bubble that occurred in 2020. And I see that you're nodding your head. So tell us, has the bubble really broken yet? And if not, when will things in our industry get back to the kind of pre-COVID normality?
You're alluding to the 2020 bubble, which really happened when way too many investors came into the biotech sector. Of course, everyone was focused on all the life-saving therapies, diagnostics, and vaccines that our industry created. But basically, when there's too much money that comes into the sector, what happens is that good and low-quality companies become financed. And so subsequently, we had a year where we where we are basically recovering from that. But then that hangover has lasted now 2, 3, almost 4 years. Why is that? Well, of course, there were geopolitical issues that came along the way. There was also rising interest rates associated with increasing inflation. And then obviously as well, a change in the administration and instability or potential perceptions of instability at the FDA. But I think the real issue with regard to the fundamentals is those lower quality companies that were financed in 2020. Many of them were financed not only with too much cash, without a lot of capital discipline, but then also at excessive valuations. And so what happened is those companies either then have to grow into those valuations and deserve the valuations that they've been raising money at, or they have to go for down rounds. And so that's what we saw basically over the course of the last 2 years, where we see many private and public companies raising down rounds. And basically, as slowly as each of those guys, let's say, comes to Jesus, is always my joke in terms of what their actual valuation that they deserve is, I think that we've reset the biotech markets. And so now that things are more or less reset, that means that we can actually make money, because we make money when companies create value, and that's represented in the share price. And so from that reset, I think we're kind of nearly there. Obviously, the public markets have been reset for years now. We basically were down 20% in 21, 30% in 22, and it's been in the doldrums for many years. We basically had no good IPO market in 24, primarily because no one wanted to go public. And actually, we still had a lot of companies who didn't want to go public because their valuations would have gotten a massive haircut. And so now that things are reset, those companies, let's say, who have failed have actually failed now. Those companies who needed a reset took that reset. And the ones which are doing well have raised money can raise money. And so I think with that reset, hopefully the COVID hangover is over. And, fingers crossed, we're on to, let's say, a growth market again in biotech.
So, Elaine, before I ask you to respond, I wanted to first make the audience aware of a little bit of why what Chris is saying is important. So, when you are in the research and development stage, you have discovered a drug and you now have to figure out, is it going to work? There are many points where you'd have to pivot or perhaps change strategies, or you could even fail. And so if you don't have enough money or investment, then you don't have that ability to do that trial and error with research and development that happens. And so as the money pulls back, that ability pulls back. And so companies now have to almost, I want to say, have a sure thing or almost a sure thing when they're approaching investors. You can only take those risks, those really great risks that end up giving us cures if there's investment. And if there's more investment, the more risks you can take. Less money, the less risks you can take, and the less possibility for those innovative drugs that we've seen in the past. And that includes everything from vaccines to therapies for cancer. Elaine, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I kind of missed those heydays because I was on the operating side, and our portfolio companies were raising money during those heydays, and they that made things a lot easier in some ways. And then now I feel like we almost have swung the other way, where I feel like we've sort of had the sins of our fathers come upon us a little bit of hey, valuations were too high. We've set the bar really, really high in terms of risk, and so that we see now valuations being a major fight as our portfolio companies are raising funds, and the bar getting higher and higher, not just from a venture capital fund perspective, but also from a pharma perspective of what an early stage company is. But that said, I mean, the market is sort of leveling out, and I think that combined with sort of the last year or so of level setting, that's helped quite a bit. There is a little bit of an AI bubble percolating, I think, from my perspective. But in the same way that Chris had spoken about it, there's the companies that were slapping AI on their pitch deck and those that are actually really utilizing AI in a real reasonable way they're sort of sorting themselves out too. So I don't think we'll see the biggest bubble on that side.
So let's delve into that AI bubble you just mentioned. And I'm sure we all hope that the bubble will stabilize rather than explode. But on one hand, we have companies wrapping up ChatGPT and portraying that as innovation. And then on the other hand, we have innovators who are really breaking new ground in life sciences with these AI models. What do you think the implications are of this apparent bubble and the trillions of dollars on the line?
I mean, you're right. Digital health funding is still really big money. I mean, I think the number of deals that we've seen in 2025 have been a lot in the digital health space. I think that it's gone down a little bit in the last third quarter of 2025. But I think that's more of a sign of selectivity versus, exuberance. And I think that the AI bubble is in the branding sense, that part is sort of deflating. There's companies that are using AI to generate real data, real drugs, and they're fine. And then there are ones that are only, slapping it on their pitch deck, as I said. Those are beginning to sort themselves out. And I think that you can kind of see that in the deal sheets too. So,
okay, so the next part of my question, assuming the AI bubble does burst, or at least, a pinprick and it deflates a little, what does that mean for the life sciences industry? Because I've heard two different perspectives from experts. The one perspective is that it would be a good thing because more money would flow into the life sciences industry. The other perspective is that no, it wouldn't be a good thing because an AI bubble bursting or even deflating a little bit affects all industries, including life sciences. So what are your takes on it?
Yeah, so my question about AI has always been, what is the actual impact to the drug development process? How does it accelerate that process? How does it make it faster, more efficient, and more inexpensive? So obviously, when we have things such as, for example, being able to in silico design a drug, that's obviously much more desirable than doing the high throughput screening we used to do, where we literally physically would put 1 million molecules in little dishes and 96 well plates to screen for a positive hit. Now we can intelligently design those hits beforehand and screen maybe only thousands instead of millions of those. So from that perspective, that's obviously improved our process. The problem is for that specific process in terms of designing a candidate, that takes an 18-month process down to 6 months or maybe down to less, but that was only 18 months. So the hardest part of of getting a drug approved in the United States is the clinical trial process. And sadly, there is no substitution for running a clinical trial and putting that drug into actual human beings. Now, we might be able to be more, let's say, have higher rates of success. So, for example, if we can intelligently design molecules that don't have rare hepatotoxicity, that don't have other side effects, which could ultimately derail that drug, what we could see is higher rates of success once we enter the clinic, and that would certainly be desirable. I mean, so for me, the real question is with regard to AI, and I'm no expert in this field by far, which is really what is going to be the ultimate impact? When I asked Fas Narasimhan, the CEO of Novartis, the real question is, when are you going to change your budget because AI is making an impact? When are you going to change your internal rate of return based upon the contribution of AI? So we haven't yet seen that magnitude of impact on the drug discovery process. But for sure, on the services side, that's obviously transformative. And there I see, the majority impact. The other area is regulatory. Obviously the ability to create regulatory applications, which used to be literally a truckload of physical documents, now being into, let's say, intelligently created or automatically created. I think that's a huge win. And then as well, I heard from Martin McCary this week that they're also using AI to evaluate and process those applications into formats for their review. So I think all of these things will make an impact and slowly bring down the time and the cost of drug development.
Yeah, and I just to kind of go on that side of the things, we are using a company to help us with our R&D application. It makes it so much easier to compile all of that, amounts of data, and the cost of storytelling in an IND application is really expensive. And so having the ability to use a ChatGPT-like, software that allows us to compile all that data, and then we can spend our time, reviewing it, has been really helpful from a small company perspective. But, we have looked at a couple of things of digital twins and side effect predictions, and they're nice because it kind of gives us some indication, but I don't know how, until we can move fully away from animal experiments and clinical trials, it gives us a nice sort of murky crystal ball, I guess I would say, in terms of what we can potentially see in the future. I do worry that there is a big push to move away from animal studies because I just don't think we're there yet. I want us to be there. I would love to not be able to use animals in our research, but I do worry that the hopes of AI completely replacing that process of drug development, we're just not there yet.
So you mentioned a murky crystal ball, and I think that's really appropriate right now. But before we get into the questions, I want to remind the audience that the US is the largest market for life sciences. And so anything that happens in the US market has an effect globally on the entire life sciences industry. That includes regulatory decisions, that includes drug approvals or commercialization, all of that. That effect in the United States has a rippling effect. And so right now, it is unstable. And so, Elaine and Chris, I would like to know, what strategies do you have to mitigate some of the risks to you as investors?
It is interesting. I mean, global drug development is just that, global. And so in the past year, just from a small company perspective of our portfolio companies that rely initially on a lot of government grants, right, to begin, building up the story to then go to investors, there's been a lot of restrictions of utilizing American-only companies. And that has made getting grants a lot harder, but also a lot more expensive. So a lot of our portfolio companies are looking at using some basic CROs that are located in the US, but also in China and India and other locations. And the cost of that is one of the reasons to utilize those companies. But now with the government grant agencies pushing us towards more US-based companies, that's almost doubled some of our companies' budgets as it relates to preclinical and IND-enabling studies. And then the same thing when we look at clinical trials, a lot of people go to Australia because there's a lot of financial incentives to go to Australia. You get a great tax rebate, but then again, you're faced with that hurdle of what the government is putting on us to only use American-based companies. So it's a juggling act, to be quite honest, of what we're going to need to do and can afford, and then what is going to be required of us down the road.
Yeah, also another major theme, obviously, on the global scene is China and the rise of innovation in China. So, years ago, China started out as our CRO. Essentially, they were doing CRO activities and CMO activities, as you mentioned. But then they basically started developing drugs on their own, let's say Me Too's, which they launched for the local market. But now, actually, they're developing best-in-class drugs with B1 Oncology, for example, that clearly has the best-in-class BTK inhibitor. They've demonstrated that definitively in terms of superiority versus current standard of care in clinical trials for CLL and MCL. So I think what's exciting for China is that they're really going to become a rising force in the pharmaceutical market. This is kind of like how Japanese pharma companies emerged as well. So basically, over the future, just like we see Astellas, Takeda, Daiichi becoming major players on the worldwide scene, we're going to see that from Chinese pharmaceutical companies as well. Right now, they're developing assets. They are so fast on iteration, right? We invented the antibody, we invented the ADC, but they took that ball and they ran with it. And now we see ADCs with every various payload. We see ADCs against every various target. And what's interesting as well, not only the innovation, but their ability to get clinical data. So for example, when we look at an asset now from China, because they can start in clinical trials much more quickly and efficiently than we can in the United States, many of those assets come with clinical trial data. And that's actually very compelling when we make investments. Now, I think the risk in the future is that more and more Chinese. So now these assets actually are coming primarily into US-based or Western-based entities for development for the US and Western markets. But in the future, China will develop its own capabilities for developing in the Western markets. And they'll probably be able to launch their own drugs commercially as well, like we've seen with B1 Oncology. So I think we'll really continue to see rising activity in China, which basically just, it's basically more competition around the world. We already have competition from Switzerland and Sweden and the UK and Japan, and now we'll also see pharmaceutical innovation rise in China. I do think we need to focus and continue to focus on this as a strategic industry in the United States. Right now, we do rule the earth in terms of innovation and biotechnology, but I'm concerned that over the next 20 years that may not be the case. So I would love to see more focus on actually protecting this gem of an industry.
And as the landscape changes, it's not just our lead in the life sciences that we need to worry about protecting. Many experts think that whoever wins the AI race will end up leading in all industries moving forward. Elaine, Do you agree with that analysis?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think that's something that we've seen over the many years of us leading in that industry. And I do worry that there's going to be less focus around innovation and creativity and the intermixing of industry plus scientists, like you see in the old Bell Lab days. And then being at the university side through my role at Tulane, I'm extremely worried about grade grade because we have a lot of faculty members that are looking to leave the U.S. because of the concerns around a lot of them are infectious disease, and vaccine development. So there's some obvious concerns there, but they're looking and being recruited by other companies, and so that's a big concern on our end as well. So.
Yeah, I think that brain drain and talent pool is really the number one thing that we need to protect here in the United States. So, for example, because we have high levels of NIH funding and therefore high levels of training of PhD, MD, and graduate students, those are the people that go on to populate research laboratories and industry research laboratories. So even though Takeda is a Japanese company, their research laboratories are in Boston. Why? Because that's where the best scientists are. That's where the talent is. And they need that at that scientific level, which they presumably couldn't achieve back at home. So I think if we lose that talent pool, that's when we start to get in trouble, because that talent pool is vital for the growth of those industries. And it's an incredible source of jobs and economic activity. Boston would be nothing without that, those research labs and that economic activity. So from that perspective, we need to protect this not only as an economic treasure, but then as well for attracting ex-US investment in the United States as well.
Yeah. And I just follow on. I mean, Chris, the NIH piece is such a huge reason why we have such a great biomedical industry here in the US. A lot of countries don't have that grant support that helps fund the early stage innovations that become the drugs one day. And I think that's such a unique aspect of the US is that we support that. And then we have SBIR programs, which are in jeopardy right now, that help smooth that pipeline and as we think about the valley of death, as it were. So I think that preserving that piece of it is going to be really important to keep the scientists, to keep the innovation going and priming the pump for innovation down the road. So.
Yeah, and there are a lot of also other issues such as immigration that also feed into that. So the question is, for example, how do we fill those positions as postdocs and graduate students in the United States? It turns out that a lot of those people are immigrants when they come, but actually the majority, as I believe when I review the statistics, stay here in the United States and then go on to basically contribute to our local economies. So really, there are a lot of political issues that feed into that all need to work to make that successful. And I think we need to have, let's say, a broader vision of how of this industry.
Some experts think that the life sciences industry needs to look to the individual states to fill the funding gap left by the downsizing of NIH and potential continued decline of that institution. How realistic is that?
I mean, I don't see the states picking up think about it in terms of our income taxes. I pay 39% to the federal government, but I pay 5 to 10% to my state government, right? So point number one, they don't have that kind of money. So the money that they've typically had, they've applied toward bringing economic activity to the state. And indeed, this would be a very good purpose of that. But I think they just don't have the firepower of the U.S. federal government. So there is nothing that substitutes for the NIH. And we really need to make sure as a country, this is what worries me the most. When you cut the NIH, you don't see the impact of that for like 5, 10, 15 years. But in the future, you will feel that impact, right? And so we really need to make sure that we're not short-sighted when we make those type of economic decisions that pertain to these long-term valued resources, such as basic science research.
Totally agree. You don't see that impact until much later down the road, so it's hard to envision. But and that the other point that Chris had is that I want my tax dollars from the federal government to go into research like this. And that's what I want to see my tax dollars going to. And then the states just don't have that much of an economic powerhouse. Although, we've seen it in a number of states develop their own sort of economic development towards biotech as a way to diversify economies, especially those that are reliant on things like oil and gas. You see Texas has now invested heavily in neuro in the past year, and that was on the ballot, but it's just not going to be enough money for there to help substitute for the NIH. So,
I mean, that's a good point. There's only a handful of states that really are focused on the biotech industry. So that would be obviously Boston and Massachusetts, California with San Francisco Bay Area and San Diego, and then I'm not sure. I mean, Texas has subcritical mass, maybe North Carolina with Research Triangle, but there's not really, maybe Washington and the Seattle area. But, really there's primarily two states that are the epicenters of this activity.
Yeah, that have that powerhouse of capital. Yeah, I mean, there's smatterings of biotech throughout the Midwest, but there's just that it doesn't have what Boston and California can pull off. So,
that being said, the environment is tough right now. So, what insights do you have as investors that could potentially help other companies who are struggling right now?
Chris, I'm going to let you take that one first.
Yeah. So, I mean, the good news, so over the last few years, we've seen a lot of struggles, right? So one, companies had to take down rounds, as I mentioned. And so that's always painful medicine to take on the company and by the board. So a reset in valuations. There was a lot of rifts that happens, reduction in force, and basically layoffs that happen as companies basically had to right-size their organizations. And so I think that was really hard on the industry. I saw a lot of friends actually lose their jobs and have to basically move to new roles. So I think that was really hard. I think not having access to the capital markets was very difficult, right? So, being able to raise money to basically ensure the ongoing financing, that also made it difficult, and maybe in terms of the business development environment, right? And so maybe you had to take a deal that you did want to take when there's lack of capital. And so I would say, hopefully, fingers crossed, the capital markets and the improving investor sentiment to the sector really improves all of that, right? But the most important thing that we need to really work on is making sure that, again, we are capital efficient in deploying the money that our investors have given us, that we're making the right scientific decisions, and then as well, hopefully that the FDA continues to work efficiently and productively with us to get our drugs to patients.
Yeah, this year has been a really tough fundraising year, and our portfolio companies you have sort of plan A and plan B in terms of your budget and your pro forma. I think some of them have now gone to plan F and how can we be more fractional with our staff and being a lot more, I hate the word scrappy, but scrappy in terms of thinking about how they staff, of doing more. Yeah.
I love Scrappy. Scrappy is good.
I love that. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad. And I always picture Scrappy Doo. You remember that cartoon dog that, so, and maybe that's okay. Of just, they're good fighters and that they're trying to stay alive. And I think that's also the distinction between companies that pay themselves an exorbitant salary when they could be spending that on science and hitting milestones. And so I think that this past year will kind of shake out or rather highlight the doers, the people that are getting the milestones accomplished with less and are finding ways to be a little bit more creative in how they do company operations, and finding things like AI to help, with their IND applications instead of spending $100,000 on someone to help, write that piece of it. So maybe more creative, unfortunately, in some ways, but maybe some good Walking Dead companies can now go away, and the ones that are full of doers can take center stage. So
if a company wanted to pitch to either of you two for financing, what would you be looking for? What would get your attention and keep your attention?
So when we talk to companies, really the most thing that we're focused on is proof of concept, right? So getting the drug to the point where you know that you have a drug, and that is at different points in different therapeutic areas. But that is your finish line, right? Because once you get there, all good things happen, whether that's going public, whether that's having your stock go up by a whole bunch, whether that's a future business development or partnering deal, whether that's acquisition. You need to get to that proof of concept. And you need to get to that proof of concept for a drug, right? So again, that's why now we can't spend too much money investing into platforms because we're burning money, on things that don't get us to that POC for a drug, right? And how can we most capitally efficiently get to that finish line? Once you have that, then again, all good things happen. So, really, I think sometimes when we have too much money, it's like when I give my kids $20, they spend $20, and I give them $5, they spend $5. They're equally as happy in both circumstances. When we have too much money in the sector, like in 2020, we were not capital efficient. We were not focusing on the key value creating milestones. We invested a lot. I'm not saying that money was not I'm not saying there was no value to what was created, but it may or may not gotten you to that singular endpoint. I find that companies who focus on that singular endpoint are the most productive. And I find that my investments are most successful when they do that in a capital efficient manner. So that would be my advice. Focus on what that value creating milestone is for your therapeutic index or for your category, and run like hell without spending too much money along the way.
Run like hell. I was never a good runner, unfortunately, but I am good at focusing. And I do agree that we were kind of just following like what the market wanted to hear of, oh, well, we're into platforms now. And okay, I guess we have a platform, and that kind of spreads your focus out, further and thinner and thinner. And so I think by just staying true to what, why you started that company, if you started that company to cure blindness, don't get distracted by people telling you, oh, well, it needs to be a platform company and also needs to affect the following other indications. I think that you'll find the right fit for your company without getting pulled into a million different directions, because you're going to get feedback that tells you 100 different things. And it's hard to see through the noise as to what is actually the best use of your time. And I think, again, you still have to stay true to your value. From my perspective at looking at starting new companies, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think that the bar is higher too, because, originally it was just sort of like, if you have in vivo proof of concept data, well, now I really need to understand the mechanism and maybe get a little bit of safety data as well to help give me more comfort of there's something there that we can move forward from a preclinical. I would also say that it's kind of pushed me away from certain indications where I know, and modalities too. I mean, oh man, I love gene therapy. I do. But every other week there's a new opinion about gene therapy of like, it's bad, it's good. What I know is that it's expensive. And so I think it's kind of pushed me a little bit more towards looking at small molecules and more of the tried and true, unfortunately. And probably looking less at indications where there's such enormous risk without, additional support beyond VC and maybe NIH grants. So things that have good foundational support and that can provide some additional capital to help move things forward. Because those are two sort of bookends. You have the grant support and then you have the VC support. Finding an indication that also has the middle support is helpful too. So,
Chris and Elaine, why did you both choose this career path? It's not easy to attain success in the life sciences industry, and you've both done it. So tell us a bit about the decisions that led you here. And Chris, I'm going to start with you.
So I was a physician by training originally, so I always knew that I had a passion for the life sciences. The only question was how I would apply that toward my career. I did start off as a physician when I trained at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. But, right now I think I have the luckiest job on earth because I get to see across our firm every drug that's being developed around the world. And we are transforming patients' lives. I'm also on the board of the American Association for Cancer Research. And we always joke that, right now we can even start to discuss the C word, the 4-letter word, cure, right? The fact that we can cure certain types of lung cancer through IO, cell therapy, and other modalities is incredible. It's truly incredible. So, I think that, as an industry, in terms of the impact, I was recently on a multi-sector panel at some event, and there was some guy discussing, Bitcoin, and some other dude discussing tech something. And I said, we're trying to cure cancer. And it was like mic drop, right? People understand and appreciate everyone is touched by cancer. And so from that perspective, I think we have the most important and luckiest jobs in the world.
Simple and inspiring. What better thing could any of us do than something that helps other people in such a fundamental way? Elaine, what made you choose this career path?
So many things to say. I went originally because I hurt my hand and I couldn't play piano anymore. But looking back at, switching a major from piano performance to microbiology makes a ton of sense. But, no, just nowadays it takes a significant amount of alcohol to get me on my piano and in front of people. So, but as I reflect through childhood, I was always super curious. I mean, when I cut myself, I would go, put it on a microscope slide. And my brother was the one who had the microscope. My parents believed that he would go into science. He eventually did, but at first it was me. I was the one who looked at it under the microscope. So I think there was that natural curiosity piece of it. And then the reason why, though, I think I stayed is because of something that Chris said, too. And that was you get to help people. And then you get to know people that have those conditions. And you guys can't see it, but I have pictures of people that are impacted by the diseases our portfolio companies are trying to cure. That C word is trying to cure. And that keeps you motivated of why we do what we do. And I've worked for a venture capital firm where it was a generalist. And you're right, Chris, that mic drop of like your value proposition of an app versus a value proposition of like, oh, well, I'm going to cure cancer. I mean, nothing better than having that very clear product market fit, whereas, an app is a little bit harder. And I also own a wine bar. And let me tell you, I am so glad my day job does not rely on like Yelp reviews and the customer opinions and whether they like red or white. This is, in some ways a lot easier, to be honest, that you have this very clear vision of like, I'm going to go cure this disease. What could be better?
From piano to where you are now, that's pretty amazing. Chris, what was the most difficult decision you've had to make in your career?
Early on in my career, I worked at Fidelity, which is one of the world's largest asset managers. So you have such an incredible vantage point when you're at Fidelity and you have so much capital to deploy. You get any resource on the street, you get any meeting with any company. I show up to a meeting and I show my Fidelity card and everybody wants to talk to me. So it's incredible, and it's actually a fantastic way to learn because I had such incredible access. I mean, think about it. Back then, I was getting one-on-one quarterly meetings with the CEO of Gilead. And here's me as a new upstart in the industry, really learning at the feet of the greats, the people who have created these industries and created real drugs and taken them through this process. So then at some point, I decided to start my own fund, and I have to leave the comfort of this super tanker called Fidelity to start my own fund. And I don't have the comfort of that super tanker or that reputation anymore. It's just me. It's Chris Bardon starting a new fund. And that was hard. That was hard. For a period of time, you're nobody. You're just yourself, or you're just your reputation that you've created over that short period of time. But really, that was such a great learning experience because it really taught me to rely on myself and my own reputation, my own relationships. And at the end of the day, ultimately, now what I'm judged on is my own performance. And so even though it was frightening to leave the supertanker, I also realized that I had no control of that supertanker. I was just a passenger on that. But actually, when there's volatility now, I have full control of my smaller little boat. And so from that perspective, being an entrepreneur, I can understand Lori and Elaine and everyone who've done that. It's hard and it's scary. And I've been there myself when I started my own fund. But at the same time, it's so rewarding. And to have full control over your own destiny is something that I've never regretted.
I can understand that. Elaine, the hardest decision that you've had to make, what has kept you up at night?
I think it was sort of two different decisions. I think the first one was leaving the bench. I thought I was going to be the scientist at the bench wearing the white coat forever. And I just got really frustrated in that position, that I wasn't doing enough. And that I had I had my bench and my problem I was trying to solve, but I wanted to cure Alzheimer's disease. And what I was doing was protein purification on the target that would eventually the drug help. And it was a part of the machine, but it just didn't feel like enough. And going into the business side of science seemed the best path to help really enact that piece of it, because I had seen that bit of it when I was in graduate school. I had created something because I was lazy, and I took something that took 2 weeks down to 2 days, and that's what we ended up filing a patent on. And I saw the process of like, oh, this is how we can take something from my bench to other people's benches, and that it really stuck with me. But that was still a scary moment of the path you always thought you were going to be on, and now you're taking a different route. And I felt like I wasn't going to be a scientist anymore, which is absolutely not true. And something that I told my doctoral professor or something he told me when I told him I was leaving and doing a different job. He said, our jobs as scientists are to perpetuate knowledge. And that's what I feel like we get to do every day, and being able to get things from the bench to bedside. It sounds like such a throwaway phrase. That's a very Miss America phrase, but at the same time, it's why we're doing what we're doing. So it was a hard decision to do that. And then I think the other piece was, I've had companies that fail, and those are always the hard decisions of shutting a company down when you know there's such great promise, but there isn't enough capital or it's the wrong time in the market. So those are always really tough decisions, but they've always spurred me. I always learn the most from those really hard decisions of when a company fails or shuts down. And I get to apply that to the next company, and that company becomes better because of that. And then it also frees me up to find a new indication or a new drug to invest my time in. And so, those are the two hard decisions. So,
Chris, what mistakes do you see companies in this industry making most often, and what advice would you give them to help avoid these missteps?
Great. So the thing that I would recommend is really being able to discuss your weaknesses, especially being able to do that without being defensive. So defensiveness is a surefire red flag for any company that we interact with. The truth is, we all make mistakes. The truth is, shit happens. Sorry, am I not allowed to say that? And so, for example, if something didn't go your way, whether that's a trial or a regulatory outcome or something else, I often like to talk to the company afterwards and say, well, what do you think really happened there? What do you think you could have done better? What were the missteps that you made? I think, first of all, at least be able to answer those questions in your own heart of hearts to yourself, but then be able to actually discuss that, because I respect that. I respect the ability to learn from your mistakes. I try to learn from every one of my mistakes. And in fact, at our firm, we all the time make investments that don't go our way, or we don't make investments in things that are successful. I make a million mistakes a day. But what I do is I sit thoughtfully, at least myself, to review what I could have done better for each of those. We as a team review that ad nauseum. We're constantly discussing what we can do better, what process changes should we make to make sure that mistakes don't happen or that we catch every winner going forward? What piece of data should we ask for? What assumption did we miss? What aspect of the manager's personality or our interaction did we ignore or not pay enough attention to? We examine every aspect of the science and the personal interaction with complete intellectual honesty to get to a better place. So I like my managers to do the same. Again, shit happens. Mistakes happen. No one bats 1,000. But the truth is how can we learn from that? How can we improve the processes? And you know what? I think that actually people who are repeat winners, who do it over and over again, they're the ones who learn from their mistakes. They're the ones who actually fix and improve the process continually. And that's why they repeatedly win. And people who repeatedly lose ignore their mistakes. They're defensive. They don't want to hear real feedback. And that's why you'll sometimes see CEOs or managers who have multiple failures in a row. So again, I think intellectual honesty is one of my core mantra that I try to impart to my team internally, but I would love to see imparted to all management teams.
Mine perfectly goes along with that. Honestly, it's what I see founders doing is when something bad happens, when shit happens, they don't talk about it. They try to hide it away or try to fix it and so that no one will know, or they try to downplay it in a board meeting, and they're not having the conversations with their board soon enough to. The reason why you have a board is so that they can help you. People always put boards on the other side of the table, and sometimes they are. I'm not going to deny that piece. Yeah, they're there to, if you pick your board right, you're not picking your besties, you're picking people that are going to help you move this company forward, whatever that looks like. And I think that when you have bad data or your patent portfolio is getting way out of hand in terms of cost, that if you don't have those conversations with your board or your patent attorney and just being honest of like, here's how much cash I have, here's how much that mistake cost us, here's how I think that we can fix it, but I really would like your help understanding sort of how we can prioritize and use our cash. When we go to our board, for what our portfolio company, we have a board meeting tomorrow. We're showing that elephant slide of like, here's how much we have left, and here's when we get to zero, and here's what we have left to accomplish. And going to them before the problem gets worse is, I think, key to making sure that you're not going to get desperate and make really dumb mistakes. Maybe potentially unethical issues that can come up from desperation, and then it will also, your board will help you know when to say it's time to walk away, and that's a devastating experience. It absolutely is, but it allows you to move on to the next thing. And so, that intellectual honesty with yourself and with the people that you have around you, whether it's your patent attorney or it's your board members or it's your team, I think is really, really important.
I'd like to thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys.